All right, let's talk teen mood swings. What's normal and what needs attention? Let's go. Teen mood swings. Is this normal development or is this a red flag? Parents and teens are asking the same question. Is this something I need to be concerned about? Or is this just going through the motions of maturity and adolescence and puberty and all that good stuff? So, in this episode, we're going to be addressing some of the concerns and how to distinguish between red flags and normal development. So, really, we're talking about the teen mood meter. It's kind of what I coined it. And we'll be walking through some of the ways to distinguish between the two. All right. So differentiating from normal adolescent emotions and potential red flags can be a little tricky depending on the situation. So we're going to hopefully shed some light on this and make it a little bit easier. But what we do know is that adolescence is like a roller coaster. Sometimes you feel like you're on the top of the world and you have your highs. Other times you feel like you're in the dumps and there's a lot of uncertainty in between. And parents and teens are both asking the same question about how we can best navigate these sometimes confusing waters of teen adolescence and mood swings, be that depression, anxiety, insomnia, social anxiety, uncertainty, lack of self-confidence, fear of judgment from peers, just a number of things that we see show up in different ways for different people. And it's never a one size fits all, which is why it's important to kind of take a step back and look at the situation as much as we can objectively. Okay, so navigating teen emotions, just remember it's a normal part of growing up. It's a rite of passage. And really, the best thing we can do is to seek understanding instead of blame and to try and see what's going on by asking the right questions before we make any assumptions about the behavior we're seeing. And to do that, we have a comparison chart we can be looking at to help us understand really the what before we look at the action plan, right? So what's normal and what needs attention? So I think of this as kind of looking at normal development versus potential red flags. And I'm very big on visuals. So using a simple chart can sometimes be really helpful when we're trying to figure out how to approach situation, be that as a parent, trying to find out what's going on. When do we ask questions? When do we probe? When do we leave our kids alone because they want space? When, as teenagers, do we reach out for help? Do we express how we're feeling versus taking matters into our own hands and coping with what tools we have available? So we'll be talking a little bit about that, but just know that it's a hallmark of adolescence. It's completely normal to have mood swings, right? But it's not necessarily normal to go to the extremes that we'll be talking about, in which case it's always important to ask for help, okay? All right. So this is the comparison chart I put together, and we're just going to kind of walk through 6 different areas that you should probably be considering if you're in question about whether these particular moods or mood swings are normal, part of normal development, okay? So it's normal for teens to have the occasional irritability, right? And some get more irritable than others. It's very much a personality thing as much as it is an adolescent thing, right? But it's really when it becomes maladaptive that we might want to be concerned, right? So if occasional irritability turns into persistent hostility, throwing things, breaking things, screaming, punching walls, then we might want to be a little more concerned. It's more than just slamming a door when I get upset at my mom or dad, and then I come out of my room and apologize maybe half an hour later, after I get some food in my stomach. Very different thing. It's also about the frequency, the duration, as well as the longevity and how long these things are lasting, right? So we look at typical mood swings versus like pervasive sadness, right? We think of pervasive sadness as being like if you're depressed for 2 weeks or more, right? As a therapist, as a clinician, when we're looking at depressive episodes, we're really looking at that 7 to 14 day stretch. That's how long a depressive episode will typically last. And it's more than just, difficulty getting out of bed here and there, a little more fatigued than usual, especially in adolescence. There's a lot of development hormonally going on and brain development. And so it's normal to feel wiped out from time to time, especially with all the pressures being put on you with the homework these days and social pressures and oftentimes family stress. So not to pathologize anything. It's not really helpful to just jump to conclusions, but at the same time, if we notice there's a pattern of severity, we don't want to ignore that either. If there's increased need for privacy, that's very normal. Coming of age, part of maturity is to want your privacy and your own space. It's an important part of development, but it's also different than social isolation. If somebody's withdrawing from their friend group, if they're not returning calls anymore, if they want to be left alone for extended periods of time, then that's maybe something we can be a little more concerned about and we'll want to investigate, right? So I think of that more as social withdrawal than just need for privacy, okay? Short-lived, strong emotions, very normal, right? And we see mood swings. Short-lived, again, going back to the idea of like, slamming the door because maybe you didn't like being lectured to as a teenager. Then maybe you come out later and you apologize or not, but you kind of get over it and life goes on. And that's, versus inability to cope with overwhelm, right? Somebody's feeling overwhelmed if anytime you say something to them, they have a very strong negative emotional reaction or are angry, or maybe not just you, but circumstances. If things that would typically be digestible work or tasks or chores or homework feel like you just want to shut down when you look at it. So that's oftentimes we think of burnout as adults. It's the same for teenagers, right? It just can show up in a little bit more extreme. And as we know, anger is oftentimes the flip side of depression, two sides of the same coin. And anger is oftentimes fear-based as well. So it's looking at the secondary emotions and working backwards sometimes to kind of figure out what might be going on. Changes in friend groups, totally normal, whether that's dating or just friends, grow apart, they change, especially in high school, figuring out who we are and what we like and what we're into and who our people are, who our tribe is. And it's normal to kind of drift apart as you find other interests and other friends for friend groups to change. And that can be unsettling for the one left holding the bag who maybe didn't want that friendship to change, right? That's normal. But when we have drastic sleep or appetite changes that might accompany some of these other life changes, that's what we consider maybe maladaptive coping, right? It's like, maybe this teenager, this person or kid or whoever is being a little more impacted than you would expect from this kind of circumstance or change. And it's really knocked them off their feet for a long period of time to where now they're not eating normal. They've maybe seen a lot of drastic weight change, usually in the last 6 months, but not a lot, or losing a lot of weight, sleeping excessively, that kind of thing, or maybe severe insomnia too. School, social life stress, it's a very stressful time in life. Kids as they're adjusting to high school, it's very different than middle school or elementary. So, the pressure's on, the grades really count. The social pressures are huge, especially social media and phones and other expectations. It's normal to feel stressed, right? And it's how we cope with that stress that matters. But if they start mentioning not wanting to live anymore, any kind of self-harm or suicidal thoughts, that's a very big red flag. And we don't want to ignore that or minimize any kind of self-harm, whether even as a parent you think that's a cry for help or not. It's nothing we want to take lightly, okay? So just kind of walking through these, if we're looking at occasional irritability versus persistent anger, just understand it's normal to become annoyed at rules or chores. That can often lead to arguments. It's very normal. But when it's a red flag is when it turns into constant, intense anger, right? Same is true with the mood swings versus pervasive sadness. Moodiness is normal, especially when tied to events like friendships or school issues. But we should be concerned when there's a sense of hopelessness or tearfulness, unrelated to current stressors, right? Where it just becomes kind of a persistent state. It's not necessarily an immediate response to circumstances or conversation. Same thing with that, what we talked about with the privacy versus withdrawal. We should probably start being concerned when our teen can no longer just enjoy things that they typically would enjoy, right? In the therapy realm, we call it anhedonia. It's like a lack of interest, loss of interest in things you would typically enjoy. Life gets very gray, it loses its shimmer, its shine, and things that would normally fill your cup just doesn't fit the bill anymore. So those are things we'd want to be watching out for sure. Short-lived emotions versus inability to cope. Obviously, it's not just slamming of the door, but it's more getting into frequent breakdowns, feeling stuck with negative emotions and not being able to find your way out, right? Normally, when you're just going through the motions and emotions, you wallow in the mud for a bit. You have your typical coping, sometimes very passive coping. Maybe you sleep it off, whatever. But if it's a constant state of feeling down and overwhelmed, that's when we want to be concerned. Same thing with friendship changes versus like drastic sleep or appetite changes. We talked about that. Definitely wanting to follow up if it becomes a health issue. Sometimes it can lead to eating disorders, binging, purging, issues like that. So it's not something we want to leave unchecked. It can lead to malnourishment and other things. But keeping in mind that lack of appetite is very normal for depression. So appetite changes, but it is one of those more subtle things we can pick up on if somebody's going through a depressive state. School social issues versus mentions of self-harm. Obviously, any comment about suicide and not wanting to be alive requires immediate professional attention. And there's lots of options for you to get support in that. You're not on your own as a parent. And if you're a teen, you're definitely never on your own. There's always someone to talk to, whether that's a crisis line, somebody at your school, etc. You can always ask your parent to or guardian to also link you up to outside services with a therapist if you like. So I would encourage you to definitely keep this chart handy as a parent or a teen, just something to reflect on. So you can ask yourself, hey, is this normal, or is this something I should be concerned about? And that'll kind of help you kind of gauge whether you need to take additional actions and steps. So now we're going to talk about the action plan for both parents and teens, and things you can consider in terms of turning awareness of what's going on into more of an action and what we can do with that. Okay, so once you identify what's normal and what's not and where you should be concerned, we can turn to an action plan to kind of think about how we can proceed mindfully, because recognizing one of these issues is half the battle, right? But what we really want to do is kind of understand where we go from here. How do we take action? How do we respond mindfully and not in a reactionary way that can sometimes make the situation worse, right? Which is oftentimes what happens and can lead to family arguments or tensions in the home as we as parents get scared for our kids' well-being, and sometimes we react out of fear, but that fear comes off as anger or lecturing, and that just can sometimes make the teenager clam up more, withdraw more, and rather than proceeding mindfully, right, and trying to seek understanding before we make any assumptions about what's going on. So that can look like validation, and we're validating the feeling, but not all behaviors. So an example of that would look like saying, I can see you're really angry right now, but slamming the door isn't okay, but let's talk about what made you so upset, right? This helps because you're not casting blame, right? But it helps the teen feel heard, and you're not really, you're not condemning their actions. You're just trying to validate their feelings, right? Active listening, same thing, different tactics. So active listening is giving your full attention and listening more than you speak. Where validating is saying, I hear you, but active listening is actually focusing on what they're sharing as opposed to what you want to say. And listening for the words between words, you're reading the body language, but you're also getting comfortable with silence, right, without dismissing. You can do this by asking open-ended questions such as, what did that feel like for you? And what's been most stressful lately? As opposed to saying, hey, are you okay? Which is like a yes or no. It's a closed-ended question. Open-ended questions require a more robust response, a more thoughtful response from your teen. Okay? And being patient with it, and sometimes you're not going to get as far as you want, but it's about the consistency and proceeding mindfully with it. It's not about resolving the issue in one go. Okay. Approaching with curiosity, not accusation, using I statements such as, I've noticed you seem down lately and I care about how you're feeling. Stay calm, avoid starting with you always do this, like finger pointing kind of statements, which can sound very judgmental. And of course, model healthy coping skills as much as possible. There's a saying, more is caught than taught. And if we can model for our teens how we cope with our stress, then they can learn coping skills vicariously just by how we model for them. That would look like if you say to your teen, hey, I'm going for a walk to clear my head, or I just need to take a break from this conversation to breathe and regroup. We can pick this up later, right? By doing that, you're showing them that it's okay for them to do the same. Say, hey, mom, hey, dad, this conversation has me really worked up. Can we take a 15 minutes so I can calm down and eat something, and then we can talk some more, right? That's the kind of modeling we want to be doing for our kids. And don't be afraid to share what works for you. What works for one doesn't work for another, but you might be surprised. Maybe it does. And that's the thing about coping skills. It's always trial and error, and you have to, everybody has to find out what works for themselves. But just like any other skill in life, we learn from others, right? And then we try it on, see how it fits. If it doesn't fit great, then we try something else. We find our own. Typically, with my clients or when I'm working with kids or adults, I will provide a coping skill list of 100 different ideas, and I'll say, you know what, just cross off the ones that look stupid and circle the ones that you think are helpful, and boil it down to like 10 you can put on an index card and keep in your pocket. Because when you're stressed and overwhelmed, it's very hard for you to think critically about what you can do in the moment, but you can definitely pull that out and use it as a guide, right? So just a couple tips there. It's very normal to have trouble thinking through these things when you're upset. Now, for the teens, for you teens out there, here's an action plan, some things to keep in mind for yourself. First and foremost, know that you are never alone in what you're feeling, even if sometimes you feel that way, okay? Here are some tools to help you put you in the driver's seat, give you some ideas of things you can do, right? So first thing is to understand you can name it to tame it, right? So if you can name your feeling, then it will actually give you a better sense of control because it seems more manageable if you know what to call it. And that's really true with any problem. It's true in couples counseling, marital counseling, pretty much any problem you're having. If you can identify it and give it a name, give it some meat and bones and define it, it becomes much easier because now it's not the monster under your bed. It is something tangible that you can address, right? And you can start to plan around. So just get comfortable in naming your feeling, and then it'll be a lot easier to manage. You can build a personal coping toolbox, right? So that could be just making a list of the things that you know already fill your cup, the things you know you enjoy when you're in a good mood, and those things are more likely to help you when you're not in such a good mood, to help you ground, right? They bring you back to the present. You could listen to your favorite playlist music. You could go for a walk, run, stretch, journal, write stories, or draw out your feelings. You can talk to a friend or a family member, watch a favorite show or movie, take 10 deep breaths, and focus on the present. So that's just some brief ideas, but you know what works for you. Just be mindful of the things that you know also trigger you and dysregulate you. So while watching your favorite comedy show could be helpful. Maybe scrolling on TikTok, maybe not so helpful, depending on what your feed looks like, right? But you don't want to get caught up in FOMO and that kind of thing. That's only going to drag you down. And yes, it can be cathartic to listen to a sad song when you're feeling sad, but it's not a great long-term solution when you're legitimately depressed or dysregulated, right? We want to try and change the channel, not to dwell. Does that make sense? As much as possible. Okay. And as far as like your safe person, it's good to know at least 1 to 3 people you can reach out to. We call them safe people, safe contacts, emergency contacts, people that you can reach out to when you're feeling dysregulated, be that via text, via phone, etc., in person, because the first person that you reach out to may not be available. So you need to have a backup plan and then another backup person after that. So you have at least a few people, and make sure they know that they are your safe people, that they are the people you're going to reach out to if you're having a hard time, so that if they see you calling or texting, they're not going to put it off to later to respond or pick up. They will actually prioritize you. It's very important to communicate that. But have it handy, whether it's in your phone or on an index card or in your wallet or somewhere that you have it easily accessible. So again, when you're feeling dysregulated, you don't have to think about it. You're like, oh yeah, that's my number one, that's my number two, that's my number three person I can call. And know when to ask for help. Know when you're just going through the motions and the emotions and the muck and the mire and the stress of life, and you can deal on your own with your coping skills. And when you need to reach out for help, like don't minimize that. If you need, thinking, oh, I'm going to be a burden on someone, or they're going to be annoyed with me, just understand that if you're reaching out to someone because they're your safe person, it's because they care about you in the first place. So don't take that for granted. So asking for help is a sign of courage, right? And it's not something you should ever be ashamed about. It's a sign of strength, not weakness. Now, take quick action visual reminders are helpful, right? You can use emojis, you can use a chart, but learning to label your emotions is important. Try a coping skill, reach out when things get hard, and you matter. So don't go at it alone. All right. So this chart is a little something you can print out. If you think that'll be helpful, that's why I created it. You can also create your own coping skills lists and safety plans, and you'll find lots of stuff like that available if you need it. Just making sure that you are keeping it handy where whether you're a parent or you're a teen, that you have the resources available. And here are just some that you can also post or keep handy or put on the fridge or whatever you need to do to make sure you don't forget when you need it. An easy one is the crisis line. That's 988. If you're ever feeling suicidal, it's a national hotline you can call. It's 24 hours. There's other resources such as NAMI, which is the National Association of Mental Illness. You can always call that, reach out to them or their website. They have tons of groups for families, educational groups, resources online. You can also text the crisis line. You can text home to 741-741. If you're struggling with LGBTQ issues, there's the Trevor Project. You can call that number. And there's many other resources as well. But just know you're never alone. There's lots of help. If you're a teenager, know there's probably a mental health provider at your school that you can access. If you're needing help to connect to someone in the community, there's lots of resources there as well. NAMI can connect you. A parent or guardian can help link you to services. It's usually affordable or free. So never hesitate to reach out and ask for help. So hopefully this is helpful. Just know that teen mood swings are very normal. Sometimes, though, there are red flags we don't want to ignore, where it might become worse before it gets better. And it's definitely not something we want to act like doesn't exist or that we want to minimize if it's becoming detrimental. And you can see it's a mental health issue. So hopefully that's helpful. This chart is there for you to print out, to grab. You can download it in the link provided. And if you need any other support, don't hesitate to reach out. All right. With all that, I hope you have a great week and keep thriving. Bye-bye.